Why do you sometimes stop in the middle of a conversation and suddenly think, wait, did I already tell this story? You look at the other person's face, they pause for a second, and your brain immediately goes, yeah, I definitely already said this. You start to feel a bit awkward. You adjust your sentence halfway through. You laugh it off like it was intentional. But the strange part is, you don't actually know if you repeat it yourself. And that feeling doesn't just show up in that moment. It shows up when you argue with someone. You clearly remember saying something. They say you didn't. You start replaying it in your head. The words feel real. The tone feels real. But something feels unstable. And now you're stuck between two uncomfortable options. Either you're wrong, or they are. And somehow, neither feels certain. This video is about that exact feeling, not just forgetting, but the moment you remember something and still don't trust your own memory. Because in those moments, your brain isn't failing, it's doing something very specific. And once you understand this, a lot of your everyday overthinking will start to make sense. Psychologists have studied this for a long time, and one of the most important findings is this: your memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it. It takes pieces of what actually happened, fills in the gaps with what makes sense, and blends in how you feel right now. So when you replay a conversation, you're not watching a video, you're generating a version of it. And your brain knows that, not in a fully conscious way. But somewhere in the background, it knows the process isn't perfect. And that's where the doubt comes from. Now, think about another familiar moment. You're lying in bed at night. Everything is quiet. And suddenly, a small memory shows up. A sentence you said earlier that day. The conversation moved on normally, but now your brain zooms in on it. You replay your tone, your wording, your facial expression, and then the question shows up. Did that sound weird? You try to answer it, but every time you replay it, it feels slightly different. In one version, you sounded normal. In another, a bit awkward. In another, slightly rude. So which one is real? Your brain can't fully decide. And that uncertainty feels uncomfortable. So you keep replaying it, trying to lock in the correct version. But the more you replay it, the more versions you create. There's another layer happening here. Your brain doesn't just store memories, it evaluates them. Psychologists call this metacognition. It's your ability to think about your own thinking. So when you remember something, a second process runs at the same time. How sure am I about this? That's why two things can happen together. You remember saying something, and you feel unsure whether that memory is accurate. Those are two separate signals, and they don't always agree. And here's the part that makes everything more uncomfortable. Your brain doesn't actually care about being perfectly accurate. It cares about being useful. Research from Daniel Schachter shows that memory is designed to be flexible, not perfectly precise. That means your brain will simplify details, adjust tone, fill in missing pieces so the memory forms a coherent story. And most of the time, this works fine. But in social situations, it creates problems. Because now you're not just remembering what happened, you're remembering a version that has been optimized to make sense. And somewhere inside, your brain detects that gap. It can't fully prove the memory is correct. So it does what it always does when something feels uncertain. It checks again. It replays. It questions. It looks for inconsistencies. That's why this doesn't feel like normal forgetting. Forgetting is simple. You just don't remember. This is different. You remember, but you don't trust the memory. And that creates a loop. The more you check, the less stable it feels. The less stable it feels, the more you check. And once this loop starts, it doesn't stay in one situation. It spreads. It shows up when you tell a story, you explain something, you recall what someone said, you think about how you came across. You start doubting moments that felt completely normal when they happened. You're no longer just using your memory, you're inspecting it. And that's when everything slows down. Think about the last time you told a story and immediately corrected yourself. I think it was Tuesday. No, wait, maybe Wednesday. Actually, I'm not sure. The other person probably didn't care. The detail didn't matter. But your brain did something very specific. It didn't just try to remember, it tried to verify. And when it couldn't fully verify, it hit the brakes. That hesitation you feel is not because you're bad at remembering, it's your brain trying to avoid being wrong in front of someone else. So here's a shift that actually helps. Stop asking, is this memory 100% correct? Your brain will never give you a clean answer. Instead, ask, is this accurate enough for this moment? That question changes how you act immediately. You finish your story instead of editing yourself mid-sentence. You say what you mean instead of cutting yourself off. And something subtle happens. Your memory starts to feel more stable, not because it changed, but because you stopped over-inspecting it. Another situation is arguments. You clearly remember saying something. The other person says you didn't. Normally your brain switches into replay mode. You try to recall the exact words. the order, the tone. And the more you try to lock it down, the less certain it feels. Try this instead. Instead of defending the exact wording, anchor to the intention. You could say, what I meant was, now you're no longer relying on perfect recall. You're communicating what you actually meant. That does two things. It reduces pressure on your memory, and it keeps the conversation moving instead of getting stuck on who remembers better. You also tend to trust other people's memory more than your own when there's uncertainty. Not because they're more accurate, but because they sound more confident. As mentioned earlier, confidence and accuracy are not the same thing. So here's a small rule you can use. Don't immediately downgrade your memory just because someone else sounds sure. Pause for a moment. Ask yourself if the detail actually matters. If it doesn't, let it go. If it does, focus on resolving the situation instead of proving who is right. That shift alone removes a lot of unnecessary tension. Over time, these small changes add up. You stop interrupting yourself mid-sentence. You stop rechecking messages over and over. You stop replaying conversations like they're unfinished. And something interesting happens. Your memory starts to feel lighter, not more perfect, just less constantly examined. Because the real problem was never that your memory was broken. It's that you were treating it like it had to pass a constant accuracy test in situations where that level of precision was never required. Once you remove that pressure, your brain stops over-monitoring itself. And when that happens, you start communicating more naturally instead of constantly watching yourself from the outside. If you recognize yourself in these moments, you'll probably notice other patterns too. Subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments.